Pooja, thank you for inviting me because I guess I'm particularly passionate about this topic. I have been a teacher for over 25 years and a consultant in different things, but I came to a point in my career where I actually burnt out. And so that's why I'm incredibly passionate about making sure that teachers take care of themselves, because ultimately, we're the ones that make the difference in the lives of the children we work with on a daily basis. So we are really going to have to look at how can we take care of ourselves, because you cannot give from an empty cup. You can only keep going for so long. And that's why, again, if you look at the screen, it is self-care for teachers, but I call the presentation "Put on your oxygen masks," because ultimately it's always, if you're in a plane and they tell you if something happens and these oxygen masks drop, you need to put yours on first and make sure it's tight and fitted well, because you won't be able to care for others if you don't actually have that oxygen. You'll most probably pass out and things like that. So ultimately, we have to care for ourselves first. So we'll get started and see how we go. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. Often we feel like this. We feel that we're just getting ourselves squeezed so tightly. And what happens when we are stressed, or when there are significant pressures on us that just make us feel like we're going down like this? Our energy, our vitality, our enthusiasm and passion for the things we love to do goes through the floor. We often show up and keep turning up to our jobs because we love it. You wouldn't actually be a teacher in this day and age if you didn't like what you were doing, because in the past 2 years, with what's happened with COVID, there's been even more challenges, whether it be teaching from home, teaching remotely, whatever that looked like. There were so many things that put stress and pressure on us as teachers and educators. And what we have to look at and say and acknowledge that sometimes it becomes so exhausting. And when it becomes exhausting, we need to then go, okay, how do we actually take care of ourselves? Because ultimately, we need to put these things, and what I'm going to be talking to you today and giving you a toolbox about this afternoon, are strategies, tools, ideas, things that you can use, but we need to use them proactively rather than reactively all the time. And what I mean by this is put things in place so that we can beat that feeling of just being squashed and squeezed. Because one of the things, and this is Barside's research, it started in 2002, and what it looks at is emotional contagion. If we as educators are stressed and cranky and tired, you can better believe that the teams we work in will also feel that. It's like a ripple. So there's one pool, like you show up at work, and if you're stressed and cranky and tired, the children that you're working with, they will pick up on that. And it's called emotional contagion. You can catch emotions just like you can catch a cold. And so it is, if you continually, and I've said this to people before, and I'm sure you can all think of a situation where you've been showing up to work and there's somebody, you have people who are, sometimes I call them negative Nellies or energy vampires. They walk into a room and you can just feel the whole energy and positivity being sucked out of you. And that is emotional contagion, that they bring those things to the table. So I guess what I'm very aware of now is, what energy am I taking into my teaching day? What vitality? How am I showing up? Because ultimately, as educators, we set the weather for our classrooms. We are the ones who actually bring in the emotions. We're the ones who can guide that ship, but we determine what sort of emotional atmosphere is going to be in that room. So that's why we need to be able to show up with our best possible selves. So well-being is a personal thing. However many of you are on the webinar tonight and watching through YouTube and different things, I'd love to be able to sprinkle fairy dust all over you, well-being dust, and give you positive well-being. Unfortunately, I can't, because I am not you. But what I can give you is the tools and strategies and ideas that you can take away. So tonight is a bit like a smorgasbord or a buffet. You can come, or this afternoon, and I do apologize, I am talking to you from Brisbane. So I'm saying tonight, it's your afternoon and your day, wherever you're watching this. But what I'm giving you is ideas that you can go, oh, I'd like to try that, or no, not really interested in that one. And that's okay, because you are the person who's in charge of your well-being. So it's defined by your own sense of what's right for you. Can't be given, but you can be given tools to actually achieve it. This is Sonia Lubomirski's work and part of my background. So I explained before, I've been in education, as you can see, with the grey hair for a long time, a bit over 25, 26 years. And during that time, I studied positive psychology. So I was actually fortunate enough to study with Martin Seligman. I did it online and in the early 2000s. And this is about what determines your level of happiness. I actually don't just look at happiness. I talk about it as well-being. So 50% of it, as you can see on the slide, is the genetics. 10% is our environment. But the 40% and what we're looking at tonight are the intentional activities. So what do we do on a daily basis that actually takes care of ourselves? What do we think? How are we processing information? How are we dealing with our emotions? What are we doing for our own self-care? Do we take some time to be mindful? Do we go for a walk at lunchtime or do the things we need to do? It might not be at lunchtime. I know I can't walk at lunchtime. I need to get out and walk at a different time of day. So it's those intentional activities that we're going to be talking about tonight. Ultimately, if you were looking at how can you develop your self-care more, we actually need to make it into a habit, because habits shape our lives. If you think about it, and I'm not going to ask you to tell anybody online, but think about it, close your eyes for a minute, and we're not videoing you. Close your eyes and think, if you're in the shower or if you're in the bath and you pick up a piece of soap, where do you go first with that soap? That's a habit. I bet you do that every time you get in the shower. Because why we have habits, it actually takes care of our brain. If we didn't have habits, our brains would just explode because they have to process so many things. Again, if you were looking at brushing your teeth, I don't have a toothbrush, but if you're looking at brushing your teeth, which hand do you use? That is a habit. And when I actually broke my, I didn't break it, didn't break my hand, I broke my arm. I had to change the hand I used to brush my teeth. And I actually got toothpaste from here to here when I first started brushing with my left hand, because I'm very right-handed. But I got used to using a different hand and it became a habit. So we can shape our habits. We can shape what we do in our days. And when we start shaping it and we're aware of that, that's when our self-care habits and routines that we need can get put into place. So ultimately tonight we're talking about the well-being and resilience habits that we as educators can develop to put these things in place so that we are being more proactive rather than just responding. And when we hit the wall, then we collapse and we just go, oh, I'm burnt out. I would much prefer if you develop these well-being habits and started, even if it's just one, take something away from this webinar and actually just start putting it into place, because that one, you can then build on those things. So ultimately, this is going to be the first, and I know it's really easy, but sleep is one of the most critical self-care habits we can have. If you think about it, and they have actually done research studies where they have deprived people of sleep. And I actually had to do it. I was presenting in Darwin about a month ago, which is in Australia. And I had to stay up very late to catch a red eye. They call it a red eye. I had to get home to Brisbane to do my work the following day. I was exhausted. And I can tell you, when I didn't have sleep, I know, particularly for myself, I actually need a good 7 to 8 hours sleep. And one of the things I have to be aware of is, what does that look like to get that good quality sleep? One of the things we need to is actually be aware of, are we scrolling too often with our phones? Are we looking at screens before we go to bed? Research has shown that we need to start winding down approximately an hour to an hour and a half before we go to bed and turn off the screens. Now, I'm not trying to be a killjoy. I'm just actually putting it out there and saying that sleep is one of the critical foundations. You've got to get your sleep right, because ultimately sleep, when you look at the hypothalamus and all of our brain and our neuroscience, sleep does wonderful things for our brain and our body. So we have to get that balance right. Sleep is critical. The next one is exercise. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do, or whatever works for you. Again, the level of well-being, your own well-being will tell you what to do. I like walking and I like swimming. I don't particularly like running. So I walk my dogs in the mornings, and I swim in the afternoons. Or that's what I try and build into my day. So I have to do it before school, after school. What does it look like? That's what I'm building in. And I haven't done all of these things all at once. I've just started one habit at a time. But whatever exercise it is, try and get outside, because ultimately what's going on, and particularly in the UK at the moment, for anxiety and for depression particularly, psychologists, psychiatrists are giving people not just prescriptions for medication to treat depression. They're also saying, get outside, do some exercise, because what happens when we exercise, the feel-good chemicals in our body kick in. The endorphins start going, the blood starts getting out there and going around our body, and just starting those great neurotransmitters that kick in and make us feel in a positive mood, particularly if we're outside doing it in nature. So get out and exercise in whatever way, shape, or form. The next one, again, is nutrition. And I often look at this and say, if you wanted to run, and I think of my body as a very expensive car. All right. When I'm looking at my nutrition, and I think, if I was driving a Ferrari, or if I was driving a very valuable car, would I put fuel in it that wasn't particularly a good fuel to put in it? Would I put the really cheapest fuel in, or would I? And I'm not judging you on whether you can. This is not about saying it's got to have organics. It's not about saying you've got to have this. It's actually just being aware and saying, you know, I'm hydrated. I get enough water. I eat foods that you can actually, that are nutritious. I don't always fill myself up on sugar. And I've got to be honest, I'll put my hand up and say, before I burnt out, I was frequently turning to chocolate and sugar one hell of a lot. I had a sugar addiction. And I've still got to be careful with sugar, because if I start eating it again, it's very easy for me to go back to that. So I have to be aware of this one particularly, and go, if I'm going to go out somewhere or go traveling, I go, okay, what do I need to take with me? So I often have apples in my bag, or some nuts or something like that, so that I'm not tempted to pick that up. Because ultimately nutrition is also part of our self-care. So these are like the foundations that you build on for the rest of the strategies. In around the late 90s, they started, and then the early 2000s, there was, in the UK, they decided to actually ask the New Economics Foundation, the UK government said, by 2025, the highest rate of any disability will be depression or mental health problems in the UK. So they went to the New Economics Foundation, or the Foresight Report, and this was published in 2009. And they said to this organization, could you please do research around the world, come up with 5 things, or come up with the strategies that we could use at a population level, not just for individuals, because we as a government want this something that could be put into place across our nation, which it's actually been done. It's also been used in Christchurch after the earthquakes. They used the 5 ways of wellbeing, and these 5 ways of wellbeing, they're 5 easy daily practices that are as good for our psychological and emotional well-being and happiness as much as eating the right amount of fruits and vegetables are for our physical well-being. So these, again, the things I'm going to go through, these are part of your toolbox. What does it look like? What can you do? So I'm not giving you prescriptive things. I guess what I'm giving you is something to say, they're things to think about. They're ideas to go, how could I have more of that in my life? So the first one, and if you look across all of the research, both in positive psychology and in the research about emotional well-being, connection, if you had to look at, for example, if you were playing cards, and I don't know if you play cards, but if you were playing cards, the highest card in a pack, and I'm not exactly sure what that is because I don't play, but if it might be the Ace of Hearts. So whatever that card is, that's the trump card. Connection is the trump card for our emotional well-being. We are as humans, we are born to connect. We need that connection. We want to be part of the herd. We want to find our tribe. And this 70-year study, so it's actually had about 3 to 4 generations of researchers working on it. It came out of Harvard. And what they're looking at is, what do these people all have in common? That they've had high levels of psychological and emotional well-being. And it's been their relationships. Relationships and connection are key. It's those people that you can call to. So it's not about having, say, 4,000 people on your Facebook page or being connected to that many. It's actually having people that you could call in the middle of the night when everything's gone to hell in a handbasket and you need help. So at 3 a.m. in the morning, it's those people you can get on the phone to and say, could you help me? Those are the people you're connected with. It's the people that you're closest to in that circle. And frequently as educators, often what happens is we don't always prioritize our connections, because we get so busy, and it might be we catch up on the weekend, or we're looking at catching up when holidays happen, but then we get busy or we get sick or things, and we go, oh, they'll understand because they're our good friends. So you might call and say, oh, can we put it off? Putting it off is not a good thing. What I'm talking about tonight, we need to make this a priority. We need to say, if that is what we want, if we want to have psychological and emotional well-being, we need to make time to connect in person, to sit with somebody and be present, not just through a screen. I know screens are valuable. I know Zoom is valuable, and particularly over the past 2.5 years. But ultimately, it's that person-to-person connection where you can sit and look in somebody's eyes and they know that you are there for them. So that's the first thing on the first way of well-being. The second one is to be active, whether it be exercise, whether it be yoga, whether it be Pilates, whether it be even just walking. Whatever you do, be active. It could be dancing. It could be finding the thing that lifts your soul and brings you joy. That's what you'll keep doing. And that's when we talked about Charles Duhigg's book at the beginning about the habits, you have to find things that work for you. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you've got to exercise or be active or do this. There is no silver bullet. But what it's shown is that sitting, and I know we're possibly all sitting now, or you might be sitting, you could be standing watching this, but sitting is actually called the new smoking. So we need to start being more active. What does that look like in your life? It could mean getting out and having a walk. It could mean doing all sorts of different things that you like doing. But when you like doing it, you're much more likely to repeat that habit. So ultimately, choose the things that you enjoy. to be active. Choose the things that you will be willing to do again, because that's what you can actually incorporate into your lifestyle. So second one, the first one is connect. The second one is be active. What's our third way of well-being? Take notice. In the positive psychology world, they call this savoring, or being, again, you need to be present, but take notice, be curious. Sometimes I walk in the mornings. So if I go for my half an hour, 45-minute walk, and I'll listen to podcasts. But at other times, I won't do that. I'll actually say, what are 3 things this morning that I can notice that maybe weren't there before? When we stop and take notice, what we're doing is giving our brain a break. So often as educators, what happens is we're thinking about what happened yesterday and all what's going to happen in the future. So we're thinking about the past, we're worried about the future. And particularly as adults, we do this as well. We're not particularly good at keeping ourselves in the present. If you look at children, if you work with small children, you will know that they are very good at this. So if they're looking at an ant's nest, they will be there and they'll be looking on the ground and they'll be watching that ant's nest, or they'll be looking closely at a butterfly, or they'll be watching certain things. And the problem is, as adults, we don't often stop and take notice. There was an interesting study done about this, and to show what it's like in the real world, or how often this happens, or what happens when people don't take notice, and how many people do stop and appreciate what's going on around them. You won't be able to see it on YouTube because the actual experiment was taken down, but the video was taken down. But what happened was, there's a shortened version on YouTube. This man, he had his violin. He actually had security around him, standing at a distance. The violin was worth $1 million. He was playing in the New York subway. He was dressed just in jeans and an old shirt, but he was playing the exact same music that he was going to be playing in one of the big concert halls in New York, that the tickets the following night cost $500. He was playing in the subway, the exact same music, and he was playing for free. What the experiment was to look at, did anybody stop to appreciate it? And what happened, and it was very interesting for me particularly, the people who stopped were children. There were a few adults, but the main people who stopped and watched and looked were children. And what was happening with those children was the parents were in a hurry. They were dragging them and grabbing them by the hand and going, come on, we can't stop. You're okay, we'll throw some money in his box and off we go. That's often what we're like as educators. And I'm not saying we hurry our children, but we are in such a hurry to get things done and juggling all the balls that you've got in the air, whether it be family, elderly parents, work, all those sorts of things. We're juggling all those things and our brains often aren't able to stop. That's why taking notice and looking for those things and being curious about that is something that, when our brains slow down, it actually takes us from living above the red line to moving below the red line. And our brains thank us for that, because it's giving it time to process, time to appreciate what is in our lives. So that's the first one, connect. Second one, be active. Third one, take notice. The fourth one is keep learning. So if we were looking at keeping on learning, as educators, we often do this. There'll be possibly curriculum changes that we need to keep up with, or research that we're looking at. But for our elderly parents, this is really important too, because what they've found is when we keep learning, and sometimes this is a good thing. So our technology can help us with this too, because what we've found when this happens, sometimes I know I've had to teach my mother, and she's elderly, how to use her mobile phone or how to connect with that. And particularly in the past 2 years, how to Zoom, how to do those sorts of things. So they've kept learning. When we keep learning, what happens is, and as I said before, I've been in the education space for over 26 years. And when I was going to university, we actually thought, and I was an early childhood teacher, and we were trained, okay, when the brain gets to about 18 or 20, all done and dusted, great, that's it, that's what we've got. Yes, you can learn new things, but other things will fall. What's happened in the past 15 to 20 years, and this is fascinating for me, is that the neuroscience is showing our brains are actually there's neuroplasticity. You can make new connections. If you wanted to look at this or do more research on it, I'm one of my strengths is love of learning. So that's why I kept studying these things and finding out more. Norman Doidge's work is particularly good around the brain that changes itself. And he's looked at and studied stroke victims who've had, or people who've had a stroke, and what their brains have done. They've actually come back and made new neural pathways. That is a possible thing. And there hasn't been research that's actually causational, which means it hasn't been shown to cause or to stop this, but there's a correlational link with keeping on learning and the onset or the delay of onset with Alzheimer's or dementia. So it's actually looking and going, how do we keep our brains active? How do we keep our brains healthy? Part of that is absolutely good sleep habits, exercise or being active, good nutrition, making sure we've got those things. But another one to add to that is to keep learning. I've seen it here in Australia. I know it's happening in Canada. I know it's happening in the UK as well. Sometimes in our aged homes or old people's homes, what happens is they actually are bringing lessons in. So they want to learn to cook, or they want to learn a different language. And what they're showing is that this is the sort of thing that we can help our beautifully elderly people, because what we've got to realize is if they keep learning, they will make new neural pathways too. We will if we keep learning and keep trying to develop these habits of self-care or the other things of being a good educator, because we need to keep learning things so that we can be at the forefront of what's good for the children we work with. So this is also, I'm not just saying it can't just be about work though. You need to keep learning, whether it's about photography, whether it's learning to do the Latin salsa or dance, whether it's learning to knit, to crochet. I know, my goodness, I didn't have time because during the pandemic, I kept working. So we were kept teaching and kept teaching remotely, but there were so many people saying they kept learning about making bread or doing whatever they were doing at home. So I guess these are the sorts of things where it helped us feel connected. It kept us actually mentally active and created those new neural pathways. But what I can tell you, and I'm particularly, I got to go back, I have dropped my habit of photography. So I got so busy in the past, most probably in the past 10 years, I haven't gone back to my hobby of photography. If I pick it up, I may still have some of that wiring in my brain, but I know it's not all going to be there. So when we are learning new things, don't expect it to be easy straight away. It might feel like that you're chopping your way through the jungle sometimes, and that's okay, because that's actually your brain. Really, you've got to keep doing it or keep making it a habit until it becomes a neural superhighway. So you have to cut some of those vines out. But trust me, keeping on learning is another way, and particularly one of the 5 ways of well-being. Learning is one of the really big ways to keep going. The next one is to give. Now, as educators, and particularly early childhood educators, but educators in any field, this is something we do almost automatically. We give of ourselves. We do it every day. We don't have to. And when I say this, often people say, oh, but I give so much. That's why we need to take care of ourselves. So sometimes this is about giving to self as well. Sometimes it's about making sure that we give that time that we need to slow down, to make time for ourselves, and to give ourselves self-compassion, because often we are our own worst critics. So it may be that you can give of your time, if you could give of your talents, possibly money. But what the research has found in positive psychology, it's found that when we give, when we help others, and not just a hand out, but a helping hand up, that actually does, it's called a giver's high. And if anybody's ever experienced that, when you've done something for somebody else, it gives you a nice warm feeling in here. So if you volunteer, or you, it might be at Christmas time, you give things to other people, or you do those sorts of things, it makes you feel warm inside. It's because as humans, we want to help others. The majority of humans actually want to do the right thing. They want to make somebody's life a little bit easier. And particularly for us as educators, we do that every day with the children we work with. Whether it be, and it can be a really short phone call, a text, and I know using technology is a great thing. Sometimes we make cards with the children I do. We talk about making cards, or book creator, or different things like that. But sometimes it's also good just to come back to the basics, to pick up the phone and go, I just wanted to give you a really give you a call to check in. Again, so it's giving of that time, that connection, and bringing these things together. Because ultimately, what we're doing is these 5 ways of well-being that we've just talked about. Those are the things that make the difference in our lives. So there's a wide range of activities. Again, this is a smorgasbord. You could do many things to get those 5 ways into your life. But ultimately, you've got to decide, what do I want to do? What fits me? What fits my life? Because, yeah, Carrie talked about giving, but at the moment, there's different seasons in life. And you may actually be in a season where you need to give to yourself. And that is okay. That's okay to give to yourself, to give that compassion and give that love and care. Because when you do that, you'll then be able to give to others again. Another way that we talk about this is to talk about laughing. And I guess when I look at laughing, as adults, we don't laugh anywhere near as much at all, anywhere near as much. And so the children that I work with, and any children can laugh up to 300 times a day. As adults, we generally laugh anywhere between maybe 20 to 100 times a day, if that. Laughing does wonderful things for the body. So I'm not sure if any of you are aware, we have a nerve. It's called the vagal nerve, or the vagus nerve. It travels from our brain all the way through our body and touches almost every organ in our body. And the vagus nerve, one of the things we're going to be talking about in the strategies we're going to be looking at in a minute, when you laugh, that actually stimulates the vagal nerve. And when the vagal nerve is stimulated, and it can feel that, what happens is it helps the body relax. It puts the body into parasympathetic and the nervous system. It switches that on, which means that's where we actually restore and rejuvenate. So I do have something, I'm hoping it works, and we'll see.
Emma.
Can you hear it, Pooja?
Emma. Emma.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Harry.
Emma. Emma. Emma.
That is very much my husband and myself.
Emma.
And I don't particularly like those things, but it's just something to make you laugh, or to look at and go, what does it look like in your house where people are going, how can you make people laugh? How could you just have some fun, extra fun? Because ultimately, and it's not laughing at people, it's finding things and finding sparks of joy in your day. So really quickly, because I know what time it is, and I did want to leave time for questions. We're going to talk about the toolbox now, or what you can use in your toolbox. So really quick and easy. And I was talking about the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve a minute ago. If you can also think of how you can do this triangle breathing or box breathing. And if you can sit up, and I'm going to do it, but you can feel, I often say, feel your stomach. And one of the ways you can do this, and I know it sounds crazy, put your hand like that, and then insert your little finger into your belly button. I know it sounds crazy, but then lay your hand flat on your stomach. What you're doing there, where your hand is, that's your diaphragm. We often do not breathe deeply enough. Many of us shallow breathe up here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is breathe in and breathe out. And when you do that, your hand needs to go rise up and down. I often do this with children, and how we get them to do it, I get them to lay on their back and they sit a teddy bear on their tummy, and they talk about giving the teddy bear a ride up and down. So they breathe in and out. So their diaphragm, it's deep breathing. And one of the ways you can do it is triangle breathing. We call it triangle breathing. Breathe in for 4, deep breathe in, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. So that's one of the ways you could do it as well. But that, when we deep breathe, it's like laughing. When we breathe in our diaphragm, that stimulates the vagal nerve. There is really only one way to tell your brain you are safe. You can tell your brain you're safe, like you can try and go, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. But when you're doing that, the brain doesn't listen. Often, particularly if we've had an amygdala hijack. Think of this. I know I'm using the whole brain child, the whole brain from Dan Siegel's work, the whole brain child. This is our brain. Often we have an amygdala hijack. This is the amygdala. This is the prefrontal cortex. Here is our prefrontal cortex. That actually, that's where we regulate. That's where we do our higher process thinking, order thinking. But what happens when we get scared or stressed, the amygdala hijacks it. So we have an amygdala hijack and a brain flip. How we can get our brain back into control is if we deep breathe, because what our breathing is telling our brain, when we breathe deeply, our brain all of a sudden goes, oh, you're breathing like that, you must be safe. The body is breathing like that, it must be calm. So that's how it actually calms our body and puts us back takes us out of fight, flight, or freeze. Take a walk if at all possible. So these are some quick and easy ideas. If you can get up and move around or do those sorts of things, take a walk. Take a mental break. I often, even if, and I know it's a bit easier said than done, I sometimes, if I'm teaching at school or different things, in my lunch hour or even in my morning tea break, if I'm not on duty taking care of the children, I sometimes, and I say to people, think of your favorite place to be. Close your eyes and think of it. Think of what you can smell there and things like that, because that's actually giving you a really quick mental break. It's helping you switch from what's happening now and being stressed to somewhere you find calm and somewhere you find where your spirit and your soul, where you actually enjoy being. And that actually changes your perception of the situation. Rehydrate, absolutely. We are so frequently dehydrated. And again, our body is majority of water. If we are dehydrated, our brains don't think well. So we need to make sure we're drinking enough water. Switch tasks if you can. A quick massage, whether it be your shoulders, your neck. Sometimes it can be the lobes of your ears. Sometimes it can be in here. There's pressure points you can use that will, again, just relieve it. It could also be that you use essential oils as well. Posture. you all, and I'm sure you would have done this before, but if you come into a situation and you're hunched over and you're looking at the floor, you'll feel down and depressed. So really think, okay, I'm rolling my shoulders back, I'm standing straight, I'm looking up, I'm breathing. Because again, what's happening is when we do that, we're squashing our diaphragm and we don't deep breathe. When we bring our shoulders back, we actually free up our diaphragm so we can deep breathe. And stretching, particularly and especially your neck. So whether it's that, because often where we hold most tension, jaw, neck, and shoulders frequently. So those are some quick and easy strategies that you can use. Again, really easy for self-care. Ultimately, though, the one thing I wanted to say, and I know we're winding up, or I really do want to leave some time for questions, and I can see something's in the chat. Be kind to yourselves. We all have this little thing that sits on our shoulder. It's an itty bitty crappy committee. And often we say things to ourselves like, oh, you're not going to be any good at that. Or, oh, look what you look like in this. We are more nasty to ourselves than we would ever be to anybody else. We have around 70,000 thoughts per day. And one of the problems is the majority of those thoughts are negative. They're negative about ourselves. We picked this thing up wherever it's come from. It could sound like your parents. It could sound, and often sounds like a teacher that you had. No, you're not going to be successful in that field. But this thing, it talks about, and we need to learn, how do we tame our negative self-talk? We need to be compassionate and kind. You're doing an amazing job. The reason I know this is because I've been an early childhood and still am an early childhood educator. I've worked with students who have special needs. I work with students who've been abused. We show up every single day as educators to make a difference in the lives of the children we work with. And that's why we need to be kind to ourselves, because unless we're taking care of us first, we can't continue to make a huge difference in their lives. I've worked with thousands of educators. I know without a shadow of a doubt, that you make a huge difference in the lives of the children you work with. They look forward to seeing you every day. They look forward to sharing things with you. You may be the only safe person that they know. You may be the only stable person that they know. There may be change or other things going on in their lives, and you're the one constant. That's a critical role to play. And that's why we need to take care of ourselves, because ultimately, if you're not there, that will change their world. You will shape their future. As I said before, it often sounds like a teacher. And frequently, and please don't beat yourself up if you have used a throwaway line. I know I've said things before. I was working with a student who has autism. This was last month. Actually, no, it was in September. And I don't know if you know students with autism, but they can be very literal. And I said, oh, be careful or they're going to eat you alive. And I didn't mean it. And I immediately said, oh, I don't mean that. I mean that if you're going to get in trouble for that. But I needed to go, I'm not going to beat myself up. I have to be compassionate. And I did apologize. And I said, look, I'm sorry. I know that wasn't a good thing to say. I didn't mean it literally. I owned the mistake. But I also know that comments from teachers can stay in young children's lives. If you think about what you believe about yourself, I'm sure that it would have come from either your parents or teachers or really influential people in your life, particularly when you were young. I've talked to thousands of adults and I ask them to listen to that voice, that itty bitty crappy committee, and say, where did it come from? And they'll often say it was what my teacher said, or it's what my parents said to me. So ultimately, be kind to yourselves, because you do make a difference, and their future will be a brighter place because of your work with them. Do not burn both ends of the candle or both ends of the match. Ultimately, it's up to you. I'm not telling you how to live your life, but I am saying that this is not a way to continue to be the best educator that you can possibly be. That's why when Pooja asked me to be on tonight and to do this webinar, I was so, one, very honored, but two, incredibly grateful, because I know how much teachers shape the lives of children. And I've been at that place where I'm burning both ends of the candle or both ends of the match. I don't want that for other people. I don't want you to burn out. I want you to take care of yourselves, because ultimately you're the ones that make the difference in the lives of those children. You're the ones that actually, children will look back and go, I did this because my teacher believed in me, because they thought I could do it. So you don't need to use all of the strategies. Yes, no, or maybe. You decide. Pick the ones that fit best with you. It's got to be a person fit. If it's mismatched, it won't work. That's why I said, whatever you choose, whether it's being active or whatever works for you, do that. And just start with one thing. Tailor the strategies to fit your lifestyle. It doesn't have to be all of what I've said at all. You can choose one thing, just one thing. Because ultimately, don't pile more on your plate. How I look at life, I look at it like we've got a dinner plate. And that dinner plate can be sometimes very, very full. Don't just pile one more thing off on it, because it will fall off. Take some time to look at that dinner plate and go, what's on it? Can I fit something, even just one small thing that will take care of my well-being? What would that be? And how can I embed it in my life? And when you've got that one, then start maybe putting another one in there. To give you an example of how I did this, I didn't used to floss my teeth. I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't. And I have some cavities to prove it. My dentist, I went to a new dentist and she said, you don't floss your teeth. And I said, well, and she went, well, I can tell because your gums. I said, okay. So I chose to start flossing my teeth. But how I did it, I tied it to the habit of brushing my teeth. So I had to make it every night before I went to bed. I had to pick up the floss. I left it out where I could see it. And I thought, yep, I'm going to develop this habit. I tied it to another habit, which was brushing my teeth. And then now I just have the habit of brushing and flossing and brushing my teeth every night. Whatever you do, if you can tie the new habit to something else you already do, it will be much more successful. So we're coming to the end, and where we can again ask some questions, but ultimately, don't take yourselves too seriously. I try not to take myself too seriously. I try and have a good laugh every day, because ultimately the best laid plans can go astray, just like this. So you may think that it's going to work out one way, but then more often than not, it actually works out the way of the gentleman with the Coke bottle. Ultimately, though, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the year, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for giving me your time this afternoon or this evening, or taking time to watch this, because ultimately time is the one precious resource. Time and health are the two resources that you can't get back. and you've chosen to spend that time with me. So Pooja, thank you so much again for inviting me. I've had an absolute blast, and I hope that I've brought something to the table that the educators can use in their lives to take better care of themselves.
That was amazing, Carrie. Thanks a lot. And I think it's 1 hour that is definitely well spent. And I'm sure many more teachers and educators are going to watch this and follow what suits them. And there is a question from Dr. Pankaj.
Mm-hmm.
Just a second. Yeah. Dear Carrie, great to meet you. I learned about name during one of STEM curriculum and another dyslexia session. I participated for 2 Australian organizations recently. My question is how to maintain self-care in person and virtual teaching environments.
How do I maintain self-care? Dr. Pooja,
I guess the question is how to maintain self-care in in-person and teaching environment. So now if you're teaching in person and you're teaching in virtual environment, so in person are with a colleague, so and virtual is you are alone and you're working.
That whether I had to do both. So in the pandemic, we were teaching virtually as well, and then coming back into classrooms. How did we teach or how do you do it in person? I guess one, you can see behind me, but I got up and moved a lot when I or made sure that I stood up because of the sitting. So I got a standing desk and I tried to stand up, or I tried to do those sorts of things. I tried to bring in for my teaching and for the children as well, some movement breaks, or did some fun things or things like that. I found things that would make us all laugh. In person, again, it depends. If I'm having, so there may be things that I do, like I might massage my earlobes or different things like that to wake myself up. It depends on where I am. In the classroom, I'll definitely try and drink. And I know, I don't know about you guys, I've learned to hold on but I try and drink as much water throughout the day as possible, because I know by the end of the day, if I haven't drunk enough, I'll get a huge headache. So if I was looking at those things, how I do it in person, it's also, and I use my phone, but I look through the photos that I have on my phone. So again, taking notice or being curious, if I need a boost or a positive boost, I look at things that make me happy. So my photos, good memories on my phone, or even sometimes if I need a boost to start the day or things like that, I'll find some funny YouTube clips that I can watch or funny videos. It's just how I can get jolts of joy and well-being in my day. Or I might close my eyes or do a 2-minute meditation before I start the day to center myself and give the intention of what I intend to bring to the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I've heard of your name during 2 of the sessions I've been attending for Code Like a Girl organization, other one as well. And
okay.
So yeah, your name came up twice in this session. So I was contributing towards the STEM curriculum in Australia. And
thank you.
Yeah, and my question is, so I've taught in China and Thailand in colleges. So I primarily teach higher education. So I've experienced teaching in the ESL environments, and I've myself studied in my PhD in UK and a master's in the United States. So what I see, the environments in person would also change. And,
yes.
Like you mentioned, when you are in in-person environment, you need to make eye contacts, you need to talk to your colleagues, but that becomes very restricted when you are in a ESL country where, the talk therapy does not work. And then if you go to a Western country, yes, there are things to talk, which you can experience in your countries where you have studied or, where you have worked, so you can talk more about that. But that doesn't happen when you are in a country which is non-English speaking. So what to do then?
And that, so again, it's understanding the culture. So I worked in Japan, I've worked in Asia, and it's again learning and respecting their culture. Absolutely. So it's understanding, and it's also, so a part of was keep learning. But I guess for me, part of taking care of myself was knowing that I was going in, understanding possibly what I would be, the culture I'm going into. So making sure that I understood that, making sure that I did the right thing, because I don't want to offend people. I don't want to, and again, learning about what can we do to make everything as inclusive as possible. So sometimes, again, it's also then thinking about how do I make my, on Zoom particularly, how do I make my Zoom or my PowerPoint, how do I make that more inclusive? How do I make that more friendly for people with disabilities? So possibly sometimes using closed captions or those sorts of things. So making sure that I do as much as possible to be as inclusive as possible. And that will also drop my anxiety level rising, because if I have to present for people overseas, and I presented, and I was saying to Pooja before, I presented in India at different times and on Zoom. So you try and learn as much about the culture of the country and what happens in their education systems and what are they expecting, and also what do they do for their well-being. So it's not just going from a Western-centric approach, it's actually looking and saying, how can we be culturally diverse? Because I know I've done some work in China, and again, when we talk about when I lived in Japan particularly, and I taught in Japan, there was a much more extended family situation. So they have a much more rich connection and support with their family networks, where their families are, and that's something that I value, and I brought that home. So my mum lives with me. I much prefer that. I know in some Western cultures that doesn't happen, but I think that the wisdom of our elders. So again, it's knowing those sorts of things and what do you bring to the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think having your mindset developed to where you're going to teach would certainly help making a self-clear plan. Now, I teach synchronously, asynchronously, and in person. And, I try to see, you have to adjust yourself and also take care of yourself first, because you're going to be in front of your computer for long hours. So I think, what I've been doing is taking short breaks, doing something different before I start to teach. Synchronously, asynchronously, and in person, it's definitely different. So I think taking care of yourself from your session comes first before you start educating students.
Yes, very much so, because ultimately when you are teaching online particularly, it takes a lot more energy than it actually does teaching in person, because you have to be almost a bigger version of yourself to present the energy you wish to bring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, for example, if somebody wants to move and now teach in Australia, what suggestions you would give in taking pre-self-care before you start educating in a very different type of an environment?
I guess, again, I would look at it and go, it's up. So know yourself, know what you need. And then, because Australians are fairly laid back, but also that's part of the problem here and at different times. I will see people who are on the screen, but often in Australia, when I do webinars, they shut their cameras off, so I can't see people. And I actually like to see people. So it can be a bit tricky at times. So know that just because their camera is off doesn't mean that they don't want to participate, doesn't mean that you can't bring all of yourself there. So know what works for you. I made sure I was hydrated. So for the webinar tonight, made sure I was hydrated. I've gone for my walks today. I've made sure that I feel comfortable, that I'm in a good space, that I've got a good chair to sit in. Those are the sorts of things that I do, and make sure that I show up in the best way possible for the people I'm educating or spending time with.
Wonderful. Great learnings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. I think I have one more message here. It is on YouTube.
Mhm.
Okay, so just a second. It's a passage. I'll just comprehend it. Okay, so basically the question is, how to take care of yourself in negative environment without that affecting you. How to
Tell me
make
again.
sure that your negative environment around you is not affecting you. Yeah.
Okay, so how to take care of yourself when there's a negative attitude around you. Have I got that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's a tricky one. And whether sometimes, and I know it sounds crazy, but I sometimes take a sticky note and I put it in. So I may put it inside my phone, like I'll write something positive and put it inside my phone case. So if I open up my phone case, I can see it, because it can be hard. That emotional contagion I was talking about at the beginning, about people bringing in their emotions and that negativity, it can almost swamp you like an ocean. It can feel like there's so many negative things happening around you. And how do you stay? And it's not about being like this, oh, happy. It's not, I don't want you to be happy all the time. I don't want you to be positive all the time. That actually doesn't work. That's not what I'm asking. It's actually going, you know what? Sometimes things aren't pleasant. And you've got to be really aware and say, I understand that these people at the moment, work doesn't feel so good because of this. How am I going to take care of myself? And I know it may sound like a little woo-woo, but sometimes I actually think if I've got to go into a situation that's quite negative, I actually picture myself in a bubble and I actually go like this and put myself sort of, I know it sounds crazy, but put myself in a bubble. And I try and think about, you know what, I'm going to keep that negativity outside, because I don't want it to, and I don't want it to touch my energy. Not that I will have to work with those people. I don't have to always engage with them. So if they're being a real negative Nelly or a negative Nancy, and whinging and complaining and moaning, I'll try and say things like, look, I understand that's your point of view, but I will also try and move away or extricate myself from that situation. I don't want to stand around the water cooler or at the lunchroom. If that's what's happening in the lunchroom, I might try and go sit out in nature rather than have to sit in the lunchroom with those people. I might say, look, thank you so much. I'm actually going to excuse myself. I have to go back, and somebody texted me, or I've got to get a message back to somebody. And what I'm actually doing is finding better things to look at, more inspiring things on my phone, rather than sitting. And it's almost like you're marinating in a soup. If we're going to be with those people, it's like we're marinating. Choose to not marinate. So try and do something else or get yourself away. I know it sounds a bit crazy to put a bubble, but I just try and think, you know what, I don't want that negativity impacting me. So how can I keep it at bay? I hope that helps.
Yes, I think. Oh yeah, that's all. And you just have people thanking you because session was insightful and educative. So rest all same things we have. So if anyone else to talk or ask any question, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, that was a very great session. I'm just overwhelmed for this informative session. Carrie, thank you so much. I just want to also add a little bit icing on the cake. You've been so fantastic, Carrie. I just want us to also be aware that self-care is self-awareness in short. And we must understand that self-awareness, as we all know, or self-care is a form of stepping back and observing your thoughts and feeling as your awareness unfolds. I just want us to also take note that self-care or self-awareness takes courage.
Mhm.
You won't always like what you find, and that's okay. As well, we need to take care of ourselves, and that is very crucial. Contradictions are normal and human. As doctor was just asking a question in one of the previous presentations, one of the fascinating things about becoming more self-aware is to realize or is realizing how much contradictions that exist within you. Your perspective on the world becomes less. It could be anything that we talk of, but suddenly you may notice something contradictory. But I just want to assure you that being be taking care of yourself or being aware of your self-care um, is one of the parts of you that doesn't want to be sometimes self-aware. For most of us, there will be a part of us that pushes back against the idea of being more honest with ourselves about how you think and how you feel. And this makes sense. To put it simply, this is just something that I can say it's a defense mechanism in operation where our minds, our way of thinking, or I must say, this is our mind's way of trying to protect us from getting in touch with things about ourselves that we don't like, or things that we don't want to admit, or that feel too painful or scary. So you take your time with getting to know yourself in this way. Self-awareness is a lifelong practice and not something to be rushed and I must say bulldozed through, particularly if you have a history of trauma. In fact, hurrying yourselves or ourselves um, through all this might lead us to pull back or even throw in the towel completely. But I can tell you for a fact that the role of self care or self awareness is a form of a therapy. The benefit of this that I'm saying here, um, the benefits of therapy are different for everyone, I must say, regardless of the improvements and changes that we all experience. Though for most people, increased self-awareness seems to be a core component of why therapy works. At least this makes sense because self-awareness is the launching pad for understanding ourselves and our relationship better, taking better care of our mental health and well-being, and living a life that feels fulfilling and expensive. So yes, that's what I can say. And thank you so much, Pooja, and all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for adding that. Kelly, you have anything to add?
No, it is so, Alexander's absolutely correct. It's, but because I had a very, like an hour tonight, but self-awareness is critical for well-being, for educated well-being, for any well-being. We need to be self-aware and to be willing and to be gentle with ourselves and acknowledge that there might be contradictions, that there may be things we don't want to look at. But yes, it's like peeling an onion. There's layer after layer. So thank you so much again, Pooja. I know time is getting short, and I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. And I feel very honored and grateful that I've been able to help people tonight or this afternoon.
Thanks a lot. If you have a minute, I think this is the last question if we could take. This is, please, how can I take care of myself when working remotely and having few of my team members not really doing their task as expected?
That's hard. especially if you're working remotely and they're not pulling their weight. I guess, I don't know, if you're the team leader, that's going to be a difficult conversation. If you are not the team leader, then you may need to let somebody who is your team leader or your manager know. And I'm not sure if you're able to do that. If you, one of the ways you do need to do is write down if they're not pulling their weight or all of the extra things that you're having to do. You need to let people know and say, I'm picking up, like I'm doing all of these extra things, because ultimately what's going to happen is you're trying to make sure everything works. You're trying to do the best thing for the children, for your workplace, and you're actually going to burn out. And I think that's where you need to document and say, look, I've been doing this. I don't know how long you've been working remotely for, but you could say, I've been doing this for all this time and I'm getting tired. I'm starting to burn out. So again, working remotely, whatever works for you, it's your context. Can you get up and move a little more? Make sure hydration. And I'm not, these are the hard things, because this is now team dynamics, but it's making sure you take care of yourself. So take that time and acknowledge and say, you know what, this is really, I don't like it. It's crap. It's hard. I am not enjoying this. So be really, it could be journaling. Sometimes journaling is a good thing to get those emotions out and to be able to just get it all out. But as Alexander talked about, being self-aware and going, okay, how am I going to come today? Or how is this impacting me? And be really honest, and then have those conversations and say, you know what, because you're not doing your work, that's having a negative impact on me. So yes, again, with the other self-care, doing what you can, getting up, as Dr. Panchkaj and I were talking about, we walk, we move, what can we do? But ultimately making sure that you do address that, because if they aren't bringing themselves to the table, like if they're not pulling their own weight, that's going to make you burn out. And I don't want that for you as an educator, because you are doing an